everyone, I'm going to be reading The Birth of Happiness from issue 5. I hope you enjoy. Die Geburt de Glücks, or The Birth of Happiness. The Duke and Duchess of the Rarian people lived in a castle in the midst of the Forest of Angst. Their castle was built of flaming ice burning brighter than the sun, but if you knew what lay inside, you would know the light was the last thing the Tower of Tod could be compared to. Some nearby villagers told tales of dungeons colder than the snowy wastelands of the north, full of traps and a slow death. Others told of a burning heat hotter than the burning fires of hell that could melt the skin off your bones and burn even the strongest heart to ash. More claimed a gorgeous princess lived in the room of the tallest tower, awaiting a man who would win her heart, yet unable to leave because of a disease that attacked her from the womb. And yet, everything they gossiped of was not even close to the horrors that would and had been conceived within the walls of the Tower of Tod, in the Forest of Angst. Our story begins one evening when a young healer from a far-off land ventured into the Forest of Angst to gather the seeds of a unique herb, only found on the hilly ground of that very forest. When she heard the wind calling her into the woods, she decided to veer off her path into the darkness of the brush ahead. The healer had heard the trees calling for a savior from a land pure and free of the evil that inhabited the Forest of Angst. As a healer, the young woman had been gifted by Adalia, the goddess of healing, and she had made a vow never to ignore the cry of one in need. Now was a chance. As she walked further, another force began calling her. This force came from the very center of the woods. It was not a pleasant force, and yet as daughter of Adalia, she could not ignore it. The unseen force began to pull her along, and though the healer did not notice a supernatural change in the trees and air, the wind began to pull her along at inhuman speeds, faster and faster, till it shoved her to the ground, and she could move forward no longer. The girl had fallen at the bottom of a re-entry. The hill above her seemed to reach miles up, and when the healer finally got up to walk on, she wondered what could possibly be at the top of such a hill. After hours of climbing, a tower began to emerge, and the rest of the castle soon followed after. The sky had darkened, and the branch coverage blocked the light of the stars and the moon. Again, the healer felt an uncomfortable twinge in her heart, but a cry of the wounded pierced the air, and she didn't dare ignore it. The Tower of Tod inside the Forest of Angst was utterly still. It seemed like a place of impossibilities. Though the building seemed cold and hot at once, the healer's fingertips were not burned when she knocked upon the door. Silently, the door opened and the healer gasped at the sight inside. An evil feeling penetrated the very walls of the place, and for a moment it was impossible for the healer to take a single step forward. The fear she had felt with infinite depth and lack of love that filled the pit could have shriveled her heart had the healer not had a purpose and pledge to help the crying one. The daughter of Adalia, goddess of healing, stepped into a room lit by a single flame, floating on the base of ice in the center of the room. Quite suddenly, a fireplace appeared, sitting directly below where the candle had just been. In the fireplace lay a naked woman with skin as dark as the sky outside and luxurious twists of hair falling from her head. A wreath of flame and ice, floating like an angel's hollow, sat upon her curls. The woman's belly was swollen with a pregnancy. A man with skin as translucent as ice and eyes that seemed to glow kneeled over the woman. The man had a crown identical to that of the woman's. The woman let out a grunting shriek of pain, and the healer immediately jumped to action. The man of ice seemed shocked at the sight of the healer, but she simply ignored his stupor. The fire around the woman of night never ceased to fade, despite the blood and liquid leaking from her womb. Every few minutes her body would shake with the force of her contractions, and though her face was a mess of tears and grunting pain, the healer could tell the woman of night and fire was a strong woman. The healer took herbs from her messenger bag and prepared a concoction to rub between the woman's thighs to soothe the heat of the pain. As the contractions got closer and closer together, the woman and healer pushed together, and between her legs emerged a baby boy with coiled hair as white as the man, and golden brown skin that seemed to glow with the light of the fire and ice castle. The baby let out a shriek that made the healer's heart bloom with happiness. Her tired and worried face lit up like a glowing fire beetle against the night. "Mein son," whispered the woman of night and fire, "du wirst Geburtstag sein." "My son, you will be great." When the healer left early the next morning, she had forgotten everything of the counter, except the glowing golden brown skin of the baby and the utter joy and fulfillment her heart seemed to be blooming with. The Duke and Duchess of Rarian were not pleased with their son. His powers of magic were strong and brilliant, yet the sight of a blooming earth and musical joy in the world was not something that brought happiness to the woman who could control fire and the man who could control ice. This was not something that brought joy to the parents of the boy who gave life and love, and yet this never seemed to sadden him. But the two parents understood the necessity of a sacrifice in times like this, and knew the time had come when one was absolutely necessary. The Duchess had pledged to make her son great, and her goals were being destroyed each day as she let her boy run amok, letting his powers of life and love fly behind him. The Duke wanted his son to pass down the great name of the Duke of Raria and live life to the world. It was not a goal of this line of dukes. Things shouldn't be changing like this now. They must frighten the child's loving, spirited heart. The boy who gave life and love was trapped in a cage of ice and fire that writhed with hatred and evil similar to the one that would have made the healer's heart shrivel. But this child was born of life, not death, and something as trivial as hatred could not drown out the love he had for his world. The musical joy this child had for life was a strength no heart containing hatred could imagine. The laughter of this boy was something no one could touch, let alone push away. The singing of this child was like the joy of a billion smiles lighting up the chimney of a dusty shack. The trees of the Forest of Angst had found their happiness born in a place of impossibilities. As the wind swirled through the air and the trees shook out their roots and lifted their long, downturned faces towards the sky. The thunder of thousands of branches moving woke the birds, who in turn shook out their plumage and pierced the air with joyous shrieks of delight. The once dried grasses began flourishing, and the long, dull-colored flowers bloomed with full brilliance despite the autumn chill in the air. The child who gave life and love had lifted the burning chill of the Tower of Tod that had cast over the Forest of Angst. As one, the life and soil of the forest lifted the boy who gave life and love out of his cage of ice and fire and drew him into the world of light and stars. And for the first time, the boy who gave life and love was able to set his power free. From his fingertips grew a carpet of color and light that spread outward as far as the eye could see. As for the Duke and Duchess, their lifeless beings perished. The Duchess, a woman of night and fire, crumbled to ash within seconds, blowing this way and that, in the wind that the boy who gave life and love had stirred up. The Duke, a man of ice, melted into water vapor that twined into the Duchess's ash. What remained of their bodies became transparent, and they drifted into the world beyond our own. The boy who gave life and love fell asleep under a canopy of stars, so unlike the canopy of darkness and tree branches above the Tower of Tod in the Forest of Angst. In his dreams, a young woman, daughter of the goddess of healing, stood in the heavens. The stars seemed to swirl around her, whirling and whirling until she was swallowed up by the speed and brightness. The boy could do nothing as he watched and waited. The girl reemerged, glowing with a shapeless ball of pure light in her hands. A naked woman grunted in pain as a baby emerged between her legs, and a young healer placed the light inside his body. As the child let out his first shriek, a bloom of color and joy emerged in the dark, growing and spreading across the universes and stars until every being knew what true happiness was. That true happiness had been born. The boy who gave life and love had been given a gift. He would not let his gift be taken from him. This was a gift he must share with the world. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed. See you soon.